Hi all, and welcome back to Amelia Finance. Today I want to go through the PMP 2020 7th edition exam prep, the three focus areas that they're focusing on. So those three focus areas are people, process, and business environment. And my goal is I'm going to do a deep dive into each of the three process areas. But just a little bit of background about me. I am a PM. I'm project manager for a lot of different projects, specifically in the tech industry. And I've worked for a couple big four consulting firms. So a lot of what I'm sharing with you and giving this high level overview is things that I've seen and I've applied in my daily work. So just excited to share it with all of you. So with that, we're going to dive into people. So there's around 6 or so key areas within the people process group that I'm touching on. And I'm trying to provide some examples, but not go too deep so you can do your own research. But if you have any questions, please let me know. Add it in the comments, and I will, my goal is to go through and pool those comments together and build some sort of video out of that so I can make sure that I'm answering your questions. That way you have a really good understanding of what you're getting in when you get into taking the test. So with that, people. So first one is managing stakeholders. So how do you listing out all your people that you need to provide input from, what you need to receive input, that want to share ideas about the project? How do you manage them? So building a matrix. In the PMP test, they actually provided you a couple descriptions of key stakeholders, and then they asked you to put them where in the matrix they would sit. How do they need to be informed? How do they need to be taken care of? What type of communication methods or preferences do they have? So making sure that you're thinking through how do you just communicate. Another thing is how do you manage team conflict? This was quite a heavy lift on the test. So do you go through Tuckman's model of storming, forming, norming, performing? How do you mitigate conflict? How do you resolve it? How do you listen to both sides so that way both people feel and are listened to and there is resolution? So thinking about that was a key part of it, so knowing that. How do you support personal training and development at different stages? Either is there a junior resource that you think could step up into doing more things? They're a mid-level resource that wants to continue to grow their knowledge areas. They're a more senior resource that is a little bit tired of doing the same thing. So thinking about new ways or skills or trainings that they can do to stay engaged and encouraged is something else that's critical. And then also looking at your project plan. So you recognize that in 6 months you'll need to know you need to use this technology. So giving the time for people to skill up either on their own or through training courses. So just giving people that timeline to that so that they can understand what important things they need to learn next. Another key thing about people is allowing the team to build their working rules, asking them what hours do they want to be online, when do they want to have a no meeting day, what would allow them to just do their work better. Some of the things that I've seen is saying our working hours are 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. is when we request of meetings. After that, we appreciate people just giving the time back. We're going to work and we're going to flex appropriately. Another thing is balancing IQ and EQ, so that emotional quotient and that intelligence quotient. Some teams are very technical, very tactical, and there isn't a lot of wanting to know what people are doing on the weekends or what people did over the holidays. It's very crisp, get the work done, leave the office, get out. And some teams are very focused on the softer skill sets. So what did you do for your birthday? Take the day off. And so finding that balance between the two types of working styles so that way everyone in the team feels included and heard and everyone can do and perform their best. And finally, for this people section, how do you work with your broader team? What if you have a team that's more funded, has a bigger resource pool, has a stakeholder that's more engaged and involved, but they have things they need to deliver for you to be successful? And vice versa. How do you have a team that's smaller, not as needed, not as important, but they also need to have something delivered in order for you to be successful? So how do you work with those teams? How do you manage the priorities? How do you make sure that you're working best with them so that they're successful and you're successful? Process. This is number 2 of the 3 pillars. This one is all about knowing why you do something. So this is more very heavy project management. This, if you studied for the 6th edition, a lot of things are pulling from this, but with an agile component in the mix. So with that, there's around 8 or so different areas that I'm going to tackle. And then, as always, let me know if you have questions. So first is stages of the process. So high level, they may or may not test you exactly on this, but know initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. So know those 5 process areas. I wouldn't say learn the 45 process groups within that or the knowledge areas, but know those 5 there so that you can understand conceptually at what stage in the project you're in. Another thing is to be familiar with agile meetings, so daily stand-up, sprint planning, sprint retrospective. You don't have to know everything about it if you're not using that on a daily basis, but be able to understand like what's the frequency of a daily stand-up? Daily. What's the frequency of a sprint planning? Once before the sprint. What about the retrospective? After the sprint. Know those core components. Just do a quick search on agile and meetings. Stakeholder communications. This is linked with people. So how do you communicate? Once you've bucketed all your stakeholders, how do you communicate? What's the frequency? What's the vehicle? What's the intent and purpose of that communication? So document that or understand why you would go about doing that. And then remember, your stakeholders may be broader than just your business team. An example of this is if you're building a house, so there's the property that the house is on, and then there's a neighbor next door. How do you communicate with that neighbor and saying, hey, we're going to have a construction crew Monday through Friday, sometimes on Saturday. So thinking about beyond communication isn't limited to your business team. It could be quite a bit broader. Another thing is how do you measure what you delivered? So your software's launched, fantastic, celebration dinner, but then how do you manage and show the benefits, the value add, the revenue? With Agile, things are constantly just flipping over, so there's no clear end necessarily. So being able to document easily why you guys spent your resources and what benefit it brings. And that links into budget, right? So where are you in the budget? How much has been spent to date? How much remaining? What are you expecting? Any expected costs? Being able to document a budget. There weren't any questions pertaining to doing math problems. They just wanted to understand, do you know what you need to do when your stakeholder comes to you and says, or your sponsor comes to you and says, hey, where are we trending on the budget? Would you have a budget? Would it be up to date? So thinking about what budget questions a stakeholder or sponsor would be asking. Another is change requests and change management. What's the process? Do you have a change control board? How do you document a change request that was declined? How do you document and add to a change request that was accepted? How do you speak to your stakeholders and communicate, is this a scope creep or gold plating? Scope creep is, let's say you're building a house and you decide to build a guest house. Scope creep, very clear. And then gold plating is inflating something that could have been very simple into something more exciting. So once again, house building scenario. You're building a house, you're building the kitchen, you're going to put standard builder grade appliances, and somehow these became chef's kitchen top of the line appliances. That's a gold plating scenario there. And then issues and risks. An issue is something that is happening. A risk is something that could happen. So make sure you understand that difference between the two. And then sometimes there's positive risks. Maybe you wrote a book, you sold out of that book on day one. How do you go and get additional copies so that you can continue selling them on your book tour? And then finally, how do you close a project? You're in Agile, you're thinking like an Agile project manager. So there's like constant iterations, but what happens when your sponsor says, hey, there's no more budget, we think we're at a good stage, close it up, wrap it up. So how do you document lessons learned? How do you release a team? How do you make sure that you capture next steps, if there were next steps? And how do you close out a project? And then third and finally, business environment. This is how do you look at your company and make sure you're capturing what's happening within your company, and then in a broader scale, what are the if you are in a particular vertical, what's happening with your competitors, and what's happening even in a broader global sense. So think about the supply chain challenges that we're seeing since COVID. Think about needing raw materials and the impact to perhaps your project. So thinking about, that's what they mean when they talk about business environment. And there's around 6 key trends within that we'll touch on. First one is, how do you manage natural disasters? Let's say you're in Louisiana during hurricane season building a house. How do you plan for something that potentially could happen with a high degree of probability? Another thing is, how do you plan for the holidays? You're working with a global team. Your team in Europe takes a lot of time off during the summertime. The team in the US takes the month of December off. The team in India takes the end of November onto December off. So how do you think about different teams taking different amounts of times and being able to flex for that? What about organizational changes? What if your primary sponsor leaves the company entirely and you have to go and communicate and tell the story of your new sponsor, why your project is so important, why it's so valuable, and why you're looking to make sure that this project continues? What if your sponsor shifts roles and is no longer your sponsor, still part of the company, but you have a new sponsor that's not as excited, but still may feel they need to keep the project going? How do you build that relationship? Another would be rules and regulations. I know I'm building the house scenario right now, but it seems to be a really critical one. You're building, you need to put electrical in, you need to get permits for your city or your state or your country code. So making sure that those are documented and you're following the proper procedures. And then positives as well. How does this impact the broader company? What are the revenue implications? What if you find new benefits that weren't even scoped? So you launch your application and you find out customers buy that and 2 other products because they fit in together so seamlessly, but you weren't even expecting that. So documenting all the good things that this product or this project has done for you and for the company, and celebrate those wins for the team. And then finally, what are the trends? What are the trends, sort of what I mentioned at the beginning, but what broader trends are happening? What things do you need to be looking for? Maybe your company's pivoting to cloud. So how do you make sure that your product or your project you're working on has some of those key themes in it, so that way you can be relevant, stay relevant, and really just add value? So with that, that's all for today. So it's people, process, business, environment. Those are the key 3 pillars for the new PMP test. Continue to read and flip through and have an understanding of the 6th edition if you have that reference material. But if not, really just focus on understanding agile components, agile processes, and think like an agile project manager. With that, thanks for watching Amelia Finance. Like, follow, ask questions, and then add a comment if you want to see a particular type of video. Maybe I'm going to do one about how you fill out the PMP form, especially how do you document your hours, and that should be up in a couple days. So with that, thanks for watching Amelia Finance. Like, follow, ask questions. Thanks all.